So first of all, we need to download DB browser for SQLite. In Google, just write DB browser for SQLite and go to this SQLitebrowser.org website and download DB browser for SQLite in zip format. So once we download it, we can extract into a folder and just go to that folder and go down and you will see DB browser for SQLite.exe. Just click on that and it will create this interface. So in order to create a new database, click on new database and you can save this new database in any place that you want. So I'm going to a folder and I create a new folder called databases, and inside this database folder I want to store my database and I name it SMS. I save it and just it creates this pop-up window. I close it. Now you can see the location of this file. Go to our folder browser, go to F databases, and here it is where I stored it. Now inside this database I want to create a new table. Click on create table and you can give a name to the table. For example, I want to create a table named students. Inside student table, I want different fields to be created. For example, for a student, I will create a student ID field. Usually for ID which we use the type integers. That is why I keep the type as integer as it is. But as you know that all students must have unique IDs. To make sure that they have unique IDs, I will select it as primary key. So this primary key will make sure that no two students have this same ID. So I just click on that and it created one primary key. I will add another field, first name. Since first name is of type string, so we will select as text from the drop down menu, and we don't need to make it as primary key. I just keep others as default. And after adding the first name, we can also add another field. So add field, and this field is for the last name of the student and its type will also be text. Add another field and name it email. This one will be also a text. Add another field into the student table. This one is password, and the password will also be a string, so we will select the text from the drop down menu. And the last thing that I'm going to add is the gender. So add field gender, and we also decided that it will be the text. If you notice that whenever we add fields in the upper portion, the lower portion also adds some text here. This is basically the SQL structured query language which our database understands. So here create means we are creating, what we are going to create is a table and the name of table is the student. So create table student, and inside this student we are providing which fields do we need. So we created a student ID and its data type is integer. We created first name, its data type is text. We created last name, its data type is text. For email, similarly, password, all these things. We can now just, we created the data table, and now we can browse and see the table, what data we have. Since we didn't add any data into the table, therefore it is empty. However, we can add some data into this table from here. So click on this new record on the right side, as you can see, click on it. So it has just created a row. So this is the student ID. It is, I just keep one as it is. The first name is, let's say, Ali. The last name is Khalid. His email is ali@edu.edu. tere, and a password, let's say 123, and its gender male, and then press enter. So one row has been created, or one record has been added into this students table. So let us see how this data looks like and get this data using the SQL. So go to this tab, execute SQL, and here we are going to write our first SQL statement. To get the data, we use this keyword select. Followed by this select, we just put a star now from the name of the table is the student. What does it means is that we are selecting all rows. Here star means all rows and all columns which are present in student. And now we can execute it and see the results. So click on execute all or selected SQL. It's like a video player button, and once you click it you get one row which just we added into the database. So this says select the all the data, all the rows and columns which are present in student. So whenever we want to get data from some database, we will be using select, names of the column or star, and then from, then student. So select and from are the keywords, and then we are saying get all the data from student. So we will use select star from student. So if we want to select only the first name and the student ID, not all the columns, then we can also do that. So instead of writing the star, we can say that select student ID, comma, first name. So when we write this and we will see and execute it, that it should show only student ID and the first name present in our students data table. So we not always select use star. We need to specify the names of the columns that we want to display. Let's see, execute it. And as you can see that it only shows student ID first name. So I write the star again so that I just want to select all the data or all the rows and columns that are present in students table. Let us go and create another record. So new record, and this time the ID, let's say it's 2, and the first name of the student is Mehmet, for example. The last name Effendi, and I write it Mehmet at izu.edu.tr. And let us say the password is 1234, and the gender I will write it as male, and press enter. Now if we execute this statement again, it means it will select all rows and all columns, and we just added one new row as well. So once we execute this statement, we should be able to see both records in our statements. So we are selecting all the data present in our students. So let's execute it and see the results. So you can see that there are two rows, it means two records, and let us add another one, and this time let's say it is Hande in Baladin, it's the last name, and let's say the hande@izu.edu.tr as email, 1234 as password, and gender, let's keep it as female. Now we have three records. We can execute this statement and see it should show three records. So as you can see that there are three rows and six columns as present in the students table. So it is fine. Now what if I want to select only the male students, not the female? So it means I need to write some sort of if condition. So in SQL, we use a special keyword to write condition. So let us see how we can write that condition and select the students who are only males. And to do that, we use the keyword where. And we want to apply this condition on the gender column. So we will say where gender is equal to male. So this will select the students from a student table where the gender is equal to male. So let us run the results and see. It should be able to give us only the records for which the gender is basically equal to male. So this is how we specify the conditions. We will be using where clause, and it will not only be on the gender, but it is for other columns. So now I execute it and then see the result that it only selected the male students. And also, if you remember that in C++ we use AND like this, but here we can also specify the AND condition, so we can have more than one condition. So we use AND operator here, and let's say student is equal to 1. So select star from students where gender is male and student ID is equal to 1. So we can see that there is only one student whose ID is 1 and his gender is male. So it should return us only one record. So as you can see, only Ali Khalid has been selected because we put two conditions. One is the gender, so his gender is male, and the student ID is equal to 1. So, but if I select a student ID, for example, which is not present in my database, let's say 10, what will it return? For sure, there is no student who is male and whose ID is equal to 10, so it should return a null value. So you can see no record has been returned. Or even we can put relational operators. For example, gender is equal to male and student ID greater than 0. So whoever the student whose gender is male and ID is greater than 0, as you can see, for both Ali and Mehmet, their gender is male and their student ID is greater than 0. So it selected all the students whose ID was greater than 0, but whose gender was male. So we can specify as many conditions as we want. For example, if I want to check that, select the students who can log in into a system. So we will be applying the condition of email and we will check their passwords. So for example, if the email is equal to ali at izu.edu.tere and the password is 1234, if both are correct, then it should return the record of Ali. So we put this email and then the end condition. So many of the logins will be using this select statement. So you can see that it returned us Ali's record, because his email is equal to this and the password is equal to 123. For example, if I select the wrong password, although email is correct, but if wrong password is there, it will not return a record because he selected the wrong password. So this is how we can use the in our login screens. For example, when we create the Windows Forms applications, then we can use these conditions to check the login. Now, once that was select, we can select the data, get the data. We can also delete the data, and to delete the data from our database, we use this keyword delete. So we also say delete, and from where we want to delete? We want to delete it from student. So delete from student, but if we write this delete from student, it is very dangerous, because we are not saying any condition. We are saying delete from student. It means delete all the data that is present in students. So be careful when using the delete statement. Don't forget to write the where clause. So I am going to write my clause statement. So delete from students. So we can use here the primary key. So where student ID is equal to, for example, 1. So this says delete the student from students table where ID is equals to 1. So this one should, after executing it, it should delete the student whose ID is equal to 1. So let's check it by executing the select statement on it again. So excuse me, select star from student. So let us see the record has been deleted or not. So you can see Ali's record has been deleted from the database. So we wanted to delete only one record. Therefore, we will always use student ID, that is the primary key, to update, delete the data related to student. This is very important. So this is how we perform the deletion operation. And we can also use other fields. For example, first name is equal to Mehmet, but this is also a mistake. The reason is that there can be many students whose first name can be Mehmet. So whoever the student has the name Mehmet, then all those will be deleted. So be careful. It is recommended that you should always use the primary key. So for example, for this data table, we use the student ID as the primary key. So use only this primary key to delete or update the data. Otherwise, it can create problem and delete or update the data which you don't want. So in this case, we will always, and we must use the student ID whenever in the where clause. So whenever we want to specify the condition. Suppose that I mistakenly write the last name of Mehmet Effendi, which is wrong. So I need to update this record of the student whose ID is equal to 2. So we can also do the updation in using the SQL statement. So we will see how can we update the last name. Again, to update the last name, we will be using the student ID in the where clause, and we will use one keyword that we use to update the data, and that is the update statement itself. So let us now see how we can update this FND into the real name of our student. So let me comment it. So we use double dash to comment it, and we use the word keyword update to update the data in our database. So I just write this delete statement, rewrite this delete statement, and I am writing update, and what we are going to update is the student table. So we say update student. Now what value we want is the last name, and we use this keyword set last name is equal to the new name, for example Demir in this case. So we want to update the student and set the last name to be Demir, where we must specify the condition where the student ID, I just delete this statement. So the where clause that must be specified just like the delete statement. If we execute this statement, then it will update the names of all students to Demir. So where condition is important here. So we want to update the student ID. So where student ID is equal to 2. This says that update the students table, set the last name to Demir whose student ID is equal to 2. So once we execute it, now we can apply the select statement and see whether this data has been updated or not. So you can see that only for the student ID 2, the last name has been updated to Demir. This is how you can apply the date statements data table. So let me comment about this. And the last thing that is very important is how we can insert data into our data tables. So to insert, we use this keyword insert into, and we then write the name of the table, that is the student we want to insert into the student, and which data you want, because inside student we have student ID, first name, last name, email, password, and gender. So we need to write the names of the columns. So the first I'm going to write is the student ID, and which data next is the first name followed by the last name and then email, password, and the gender. So this line says we are adding some data, inserting data into the students table, in which data we just said this student ID, first name, last name, email, password, and the gender. But which values we are going to provide for these we have not written yet. For consider these as the parameters of a function. So these are just the pair names of the columns, and now we will provide the values, and we use this keyword values. And this is ordering is very important. First we write the student ID, therefore the first value in the values must be the student ID. Since student ID is integer, so we put it as it is. And then first name, since this is a string, so we write this one inside the single quotes. And let's say the student name that we want to add is, let's say we want to add Asia or maybe Asia or whatever. Let's say it's a name, first name, and then the last name is Shebnem. And so this order is very important. So student ID and then first name, then the last name, and now we will write the email. So the third is the email. So let's say Shebnem at izu.edu.tere, and then the password. Let's say 1234 is the password, and the gender. Let's write it to be female. Now let us write this statement and see if it has executed or not. Let me remove this first and then select star from student, then run it and see that we have another student just added into our table using this insert statement. So we say insert into the student, and you just list down the names of the columns and then the values that you want to insert. Remember, the ordering is very, very important. So we use this database and SQL browser for SQLite, but we need to execute these select, insert, delete, update statements from our application. So how we do that? We need to write these queries in our application, and as you know that we are creating this application in C Sharp. C Sharp doesn't know what is SQL. So we need to somehow connect to our database and then get the data or send the data. So let us create an application. Go to files, new, and then select a project. Since we are working with Windows Forms, so let me create a Windows Forms app using .NET Framework. So I select that Windows Forms app. remember that it is .NET Framework, not .NET Core. So click on next and you can write a name to the application. So I call it DB Connectivity, and then click create. And also I just select this .NET Framework to be 4.6. So I just click on create, and this one will create a Windows Forms application for me. You need to wait for a moment, and once it is ready. So this is the Windows Forms application, and now to connect to our SQL database, I need to add a library. So I right click on project, go to manage NuGet packages, and then click on this NuGet package manager. It will be opened, and here you can go to the browse, and inside the browse we can search for SQLite. So this one will bring up a lot of things related to SQLite. So, or you can directly write. The easiest and simplest thing is which one to select. So I would suggest to write, in fact, it is better to write system dot data dot SQLite. So this is the library or the driver, you can say, we want it to connect to the database. So this is basically, as you can see, that the official SQLite database engine for both 64 and 32-bit operating systems. So this is the driver that will be used to connect our application with the SQL database. So I click on install, and the first time once you click on install, it will ask you if you agree or not. If you agree, then I select the I accept. Once the installation is successful without any error, then we can create an application. So first go to the toolbox, and inside the toolbox you will be able to see there is a section or a group, or what we call it, the data. So if you go down, you will see a data group. So here is the data, and inside this data group you will see a data grid view. This data grid view is basically used to display two-dimensional data, or the data as we have the data in the tables in the database. So if you want to display it, just drag and drop one data grid view onto your forms. You can resize it, so make it a little bit larger so that our data could fit into this data grid view. And remember, its name is data grid view 1. I just want to add data into this data grid view 1, and let me add one button here and resize it a little bit, and I just want to change its name to show student, for example. And just let me change the font of this data, increase the font size, and let's say put it like 16. Okay, so when I click on this show students, I want to display the data, fetch this data from database, and show it inside this grid view. So double click on this show students button. So we enter into the event of the click button. So this is the button's click event, which will be executed once we click the button. So the first thing that we want to do is to reference the SQLite library. So to do that, we will be using system.data. So it is just like the include statements are something that we used to do it in C++, if you remember. So it is just using system.data, and now we are going to use SQLite since we are connecting with the SQLite database. So once double click on that table, and there are few steps that we need to do. First, we need a connection object in order to connect to the database, and then we need the command object to write the SQL query, and then we need an adapter. Adapter is basically to read the data from database, and we need a data table so that the adapter will read the table and write it into this data table. So let us first create the connection object. Since we are connecting to SQLite, so we will be using SQLite connection object, and this is a class, and we just create a variable for it, con, and to create a new object we use this keyword new SQL connection, and in this as a parameter we can pass a string. In this string, we can paste the path of our database. So my database is located on this path. So I just copy this path as a parameter to the constructor of SQLite connection. So this is in simple terms says that we are going to connect to this database. Now once we create the object of the SQLite connection, we need a command object. What does this mean? That what query we want to execute. So in this case, I created a string query and we want to execute this statement, select static from students, because we want to get all the students in a displaying grid view. And now we will create the SQLite command object. This command object is created using new SQL command, and we are telling that we want to execute this query. First parameter is the query. There are different parameters, so I provide two parameters here. The first is the query that we want to execute and on which connection we want to execute, so we provided the connection object. And since to store the data from the data, once we get from the database, we need to store it in a variable, and that object is the data table object. So once we copy the data, we will put that data into this dt object. And this is the final step that we need to read the data from database is to create an object of SQLite data adapter. So this adapter is actually performing the action of going to the database and getting the data and copy it into this DT. And we need to pass this command object. We are telling the adapter that execute this command and give us the data. And to execute, actually this all work of getting the data is done by adapter's fill method. So what this fill method is doing is reading the data from the database and copy it into this DT object, and which is basically a data table object. So for these four steps are important, and we have so far read the data and copy it from the database and put it in this DT object. Now we can display this data from DT in a grid view. So I will write data grid view 1 dot data source. It means from where I will read the data is equal to DT. It means we are copying the data from DT and display it in grid view 1. And I forgot to open the connection, so I write the con.open, and also the parameter should be written like this, data source is equal to this. So let's run it and check. Click on the show students, and now you can see that we fetch the data and display in the students.